Hi everyone, my name is Violet Reed. I am the Executive Director of MEVO, the Mawa Environmental Volunteers Organization. I am a young grower, a natural beekeeper, and today I'm here to talk to you about regenerative farming at MEVO's Fresh Roots Farm. So our Fresh Roots Farm is a sustainable, educational, and community farm. We're here to show the community how environmentalism and growing go hand in hand. And we are open to the public to come and work and learn. And much of what people learn when they come to our farm, you are going to be learning today. So how can you make a difference in your environment with farming, with your garden? How could farming be a career choice for you in the future if you are interested in growing but not sure where to start? We'll talk a little bit about all that today. We'll look at some of the crops we're growing, and we'll take a look at some of our farming practices. How do we ensure that we're using the best practices for our land in order to ensure that we leave it better than when we found it, that we are inviting in wildlife while we are growing high density, organic, nutritious produce for our community members. So the first thing I want to talk about is how is our farming different from the farming you may see on TV, online, the farming that is growing a lot of the produce, including meat and your fruits and veggies, your grains that you are getting from the supermarket. So MEVO, we're growing in a market garden style of farming. It was a style of farming originated in France, but is used widely in the US and around the world today. And market gardening means you are farming on 5 acres or less, which is a really small amount. So industrial farming is usually 100 acres as a minimum, and it goes up from there. So we're farming on 5 acres or less. Market gardening is usually organic, as it is at MEVO. We're farming only with hand tools, so we're not using machinery. We do own a tractor, but it's only for picking up really heavy things, so we have a hard time doing just with manual labor. And market gardening is meant to serve the community. So our produce is never going more than 5 miles really from our farm, unless it goes to someone's house even further. We're selling directly to consumers, very close to home. We sell to community members that come right to our farm, and they pick up a farm share box through our community support agriculture program once a week from June through November, and they get the produce that we have picked that day or the day before. And market gardening is really great for farming on really small plots of land, right? So I said 5 acres or less. You could do that anywhere. A market garden can be 1/4 of an acre. It can be 1/2 an acre. It could be a few people's front lawns that you string together and then start a little farming business out of. Market gardening is flexible to the changing in times, where we don't necessarily have fields and fields of land to farm, but we do have a backyard, or we do have some space in a local park that we're allowed to farm. And it's a great way to change the narrative in farming as a destructive environmental practice. So in comparison to market gardening, industrial farming is farming on usually 100 acres or more. It's done mostly with machinery, so through the view of a tractor. Usually the farmer is farming with heavy machinery that's subsidized by the government. They're using chemicals, so you may have heard of the company Monsanto. They provide a lot of the chemicals that farmers may spray in their field to keep off pests and maybe provide their seeds. And usually industrialized farming, you're getting about $10,000 per acre, which sounds like a lot of money. But here at MEVO, we're farming on less than an acre, and we have the potential of getting upwards of $75,000 or more just off this acre once we really become growers who know exactly what we're doing. We're still learning. We do a really great job, but growers who have been growing for a few years, I'd say probably 5 to 7 or more, have the ability to be pulling up to $75,000 or more off their land. So market gardening or regenerative farming, like what we're doing, is profitable, it is good for our earth, and it has the possibility of regenerating our land. So I'm a young grower. I didn't go to school for agriculture. None of our staff did. And we're learning all on the fly. So we didn't have to go to school for this. We went to school for environmentalism, some of us for English. So how do we learn all this? How did we learn to support our organization and our staff off of our small farms and provide a lot of produce for our community? So I'm going to show you a few books that you may be interested in, and it will go from more playful books that are fun for learning about home gardening through books that are like, I want to farm, and these books will tell you how to do it. So the first book I want to show you is the Permaculture Guide, the Vegetable Gardener's Guide to Permaculture. see if you can see this. This book is amazing. If you are looking to grow a little bit differently in your backyard, if you are looking to put in more berry bushes or perennials or grow a lot of different crops at the same time, you can learn about that through this book. So it's teaching you the very basics of how to create a beautiful garden in your backyard that lasts 1, 2, maybe 3 seasons. And it actually shows a very key difference between industrialist farming and the gardening you'd be doing in your backyard, or the gardening or farming that we're doing here. So something I forgot to mention is that industrial farming may be only growing 1 crop for the whole 100 acres or plus that that farmer is cultivating that land. So at MEVO, we're growing in something called a polyculture. We are growing upwards of 20, 25 crops at any different given time. And that's because when you grow different crops at different times, each crop is taking and giving something different to the soil. So we are keeping our soil healthy by growing a mix of crops. And also, our community members probably wouldn't want to just grab 1 crop from us every week. So instead of growing all corn or all lettuce or all tomatoes, we're growing lettuce, arugula, 3 different types of kale, 4 different types of Salanova lettuce, upwards of 10 different types of tomatoes, and it goes on because we see the benefit in growing more than one thing on our land in order to keep our soil healthy. So, as an aside, that was one book that you may be interested in. Another book that's really been helpful, or a pair of books for me as a gardener, as a farmer, or someone just interested in soil health, is Teaming with Nutrients and Teaming with Microbes. So this is an amazing book, or 2 books to grab. Really simple language, but also fun to read about what's going on in our soil, how can you increase the yields of your land while also making it healthier, and it's a great place to start as a young grower. Now, if you are thinking, I'm pretty serious about farming, I am interested in pursuing it as a career, or I just want to know, how do these local farms tick, how they work, how does MEVO work, or Fresh Roots Farm? So The Market Gardener is an amazing book. It is a book that has guided MEVO in a lot of our farming practices, and it tells you start to finish, how do you start a farm, how do you make it successful, and how do you do it with hand tools and do it organically. So this is an amazing book. It's by J.M. Fortier. He's farming up in Canada, and I highly recommend his book if you are looking to start a farm of your own. But maybe you're not starting a farm of your own and you just want to learn, okay, what is regenerative farming, what's natural farming, and how does it work? So here at MEVO, natural farming for us, or regenerative farming, means growing in raised beds. So all these beds you see behind me, they're a little bit curvy, and that's because they're following the contour of the land. We are farming in raised beds, meaning permanent beds, beds that we never change. We're not tilling this land. A lot of farmers reshape their beds every season. They remake their beds, and we do not. These beds never change. They're here the whole season. They've been here for 5 years since we've had the farm, and when we are putting in a new crop, we just reshape it. We add more compost, we add amendments, but we like having these raised beds, and we like them being permanent because that means we're not disturbing the soil. So if you're not familiar with the word tilling, tilling means that usually it's with a tractor or some kind of tractor implement. It means turning the soil up, chopping it up so it becomes fluffy. It becomes very easy for a plant root to get down in there. Maybe it disturbs a weed seed that's in the bed and turns those weed seeds under so that you don't have weeds for that growing season. And it's done by a lot of large-scale farms, even small farms. But what tilling does is it disturbs the soil structure of the farm. So what I was learning in the book Teaming with Nutrients or Teaming with Microbes, I learned about the soil structure of the farm, our farm soil, and learned that there's a lot of fungi, insects, bacteria in there that are contributing to healthy soil, which contributes to really healthy plants. So if we're tilling that soil, that means we're chopping up their home. We're mixing them around. We may be breaking up the fungi, killing insects, disturbing the bacteria, and ultimately that will result in poor soil. It will result in soil that is not as healthy. And when you till, you crush that soil into tiny particles, and eventually those particles settle, and it becomes really clay and really fine, and it's really hard for a plant's roots to get down into the soil and grow. So over time, it compacts the soil, and then that makes the soil not great for growing it, and that's what happens when you get abandoned farmland in the US, in other places around the world. Additionally, eventually, because those particles are so fine, wind comes through and it blows those particles off into the wind, and that's how you get topsoil loss. And so every year in the US we are losing topsoil, and topsoil takes thousands upon even millions of years to form. This is a really precious resource that you can't get back once it's lost. And so that's what happened when you hear about the Dust Bowl during the Great Depression. It was a lot of over-farming, over-tilling, overworking, not smart farming practices that caused the Dust Bowl, all this topsoil being taken up by the wind and just blown off elsewhere, and then you can't really get it back once that happens. So that's just an aside for why we have raised beds. When we are working these beds, I'm going to show you how do we turn over these beds in a way that aerates our soil, that keeps our soil fluffy, but doesn't disturb the soil structure too much. So let's talk about that a little bit. Every bed you see here, we turn over anywhere from 2 to 4 times per season. So this bed right here, if you can see it, let me see if you can see it. Can't tell. Yeah, this bed right here is arugula, but it may have been carrots earlier in the season, and in a few weeks it could be another type of lettuce. So we are constantly rotating the crops that we have in our beds once we turn over those beds, meaning taking out the one crop and putting in the other. So we can have different crops that we're adding in different nutrients and taking different things out, so we aren't completely depleting the soil of things our plants need to grow. So we turn over our bed, and we do that in a few different ways. I'm going to show you how we do that when we take a walk around the farm. But basically, if I want to take out a crop on my bed, I'm going to cover it with something called a solarization tarp, which is just a clear piece of industrial grade agriculture. I put it right on top of that crop, leave it there for a few days, and then take it off. And what happens is that the sun bakes the crop, it kills any of the remaining plant material, and then I can just rake off that material. I keep the roots in there because they'll decompose, and then I put on some more compost, and I'm ready to go to start farming a new crop there. But before I do that, before I put in my new crop, there's a few things I do. So over here I have a few different tools. I have a broad fork, and this is a tool that has been used for thousands of years. It is an amazing and essential tool for a market gardener, and as you can see, it has these really big tines here. It looks like a big fork basically, and I'm going to shove those tines into my bed. I'm going to pull back the broad fork to crack the soil, and then I'll do that again and again for the bed. So I'll show you how I do that, and the reason I do that is this aerates my soil, it loosens it, but it only disturbs the soil structure a little bit. It's not like I have a big tines going through there and churning up the whole soil. It's just going down and back and just giving some air into my beds and making it a little bit fluffier and easier for my new plants we put in there for the roots to get established. All right, so I'm going to show you how I use a broad fork. So a broad fork, you just step on the bed you want to turn over. I shove the broad fork into the ground. I hop on it to make sure it gets all the way in there, and then I just pull it back until the soil cracks. And I do this every single time I turn over a bed, and it makes for a lot of fun. If you come here to volunteer one day, maybe you'll get the broad fork, and I go down all the way through the bed, get a really good arm workout, and also am starting to aerate my soil a little bit when I do this. All right, so I use this amazing tool. I use a broad fork. And then after that, I still would like to sheet my bed a little bit more. I would like to give it a little bit more aeration. I'd like to fluff my soil a little bit more as well. And so we have an alternative to tilling. It's not completely different than tilling, but it is better. And so what I'm going to show you is something called not a tiller, but a tilter. So this is my tilter. It is another hand tool that was developed by a small farmer. So most of the tools I show you were developed by small market gardeners who weren't happy with the tools on the market and wanted something that fit their needs better. So farmers are really innovative. And this is called a tilter, and as you can see, it has small tines on the bottom, and those tines will churn only the top 2 inches of my soil. It's not going down very deep. It's just tilling the first top 2 inches. A lot of market gardeners are starting to move away from the tilter. They're going to completely no-till farming, which is an amazing goal to aspire to yet. MEVO just isn't there yet. And so we till the top 2 inches of our soil or tilth, and the best part about it is that it is powered by a drill. So this is a really innovative tool, not very expensive. A lot of farming equipment is thousands of dollars. This only costs maybe around $600, $700. So if your livelihood is based on farming, this is a really amazing tool to have. So to use a tilther, we use it right after we put in the broad fork. And a step that I forgot to mention is that we actually till in our amendments as well. So a tilther has two benefits. It fluffs our soil, but then it also helps to incorporate some amendments we may put on our bed a little bit deeper. So I'm going to show you some of those amendments first. At MEVO, we're not putting in any petroleum-based fertilizers or any chemicals on our field to make our plants grow better, but we do add some natural amendments that have trace minerals in them, minerals that maybe will not be found in the soil in the quantities that plants really need to thrive and grow, and so we'll help the plants out and add some of those in there. So this season, we added 3 things to our beds almost every single time we turned it over, which meaning planting a new crop. So we added kelp, and kelp is adding a lot of trace minerals to our soil. We are adding basalt rock dust, and this rock dust could stay into our soil up to 2,000 years. So I don't know if we'll still be farming here, but the rock dust will still be doing its work. So we're adding basalt, and rock dust has been proven to last that long because the Incas have used it, and we have found it, or researchers have found it on their fields, what used to be their agricultural fields. So Incas, thousands of years ago, were even using rock dust. So we use kelp, we use rock dust, and then we use something called a biochar humate. So biochar, which you may have heard of, is basically organic material cooked down for a few hours with no oxygen until it forms these chunks that look like charcoal, these black chunks of carbon, completely carbon-based material that we crush up and we add onto our beds. And so it has not only different trace materials in there that we use, but it's charged, meaning that it is ready to help accept fungi and water in our beds. So basically biochar is porous, so it's inviting in fungi, it's becoming a habitat for beneficial fungi and beneficial microorganisms, and it's sequestering carbon, so it's helping to store carbon in our beds. So that's another aspect of regenerative farming, is that our beds are carbon sinks. They are taking carbon from the atmosphere as the plant takes it in, and they're keeping it in our soil so that it's not going out into the world. And a lot of times we think about farming as releasing CO2 being really destructive to our atmosphere, but it could also be used as a tool to draw down carbon, to bring it down from our atmosphere. So kelp, biochar, and rock dust, those are 3 things we're adding to our beds pretty much every time we turn it over. Every season we tweak what we're adding as we learn what we like best to grow. And then after we do that, we use a tilther. So this is our tilther, and I'm going to show you how I use it. I'm going to go back a little bit farther on the bed to see. But basically this rope right here, I pull up top. It pushes on the drill, which is right in back here, and it helps to turn the few inches of my soil that I need. So normally when I tilled, I would have broad fork, I would have added all my amendments, I would have gotten any weeds out of the way, but for the sake of learning, I'm just going to show you how I use it. So it's pretty simple, and on every bed I'll do probably 5 to 6 passes, and that will make the bed almost ready to go. And the final step for us will be to rake the bed with a bed rake to make it super smooth and ensure that our seedlings or our transplants are set up for a really great growing period. So another thing that's regenerative about our farm field is we have raised beds, but we're also working to conserve water. So we do irrigate our crops, but we use very little water. A lot of our older, more established crops we don't water, and that's because in between every single one of our beds, what looks like pathways also double as something called swales. So swales are pathways that we dug. We dug them 18 inches deep. That soil that we dug when we were building the farm became our beds. We flipped it over, those became our raised beds. And then we filled those swales with wood chips. And if you think about wood chips are kind of like the cotton balls of nature. Wood chips can absorb a lot of water, and then they can release it later for the plant to use. It's almost like an aquifer for the plant. So sometimes in the summer and the spring, even in the fall during hurricane season, we get way too much water than our field could ever need. However, we could use that water later on during a dry spell. So the wood chips in our swales absorb that water, and then they release it when the plants need it, or when the plants tap into those aquifers or those swales for them to use. And so these swales ensure allow us to cut down on our water use by quite a bit, which is a really great aspect of our field. And a lot of market gardeners are working towards being more environmentally friendly, more ecological, cutting down our resources. And that's what these swales allow us to do. So let's go around. We're gonna look a little bit at the farm, what's growing. We're gonna check out solarization, and we're gonna talk a little bit more about polyculture and why it is important to have so many different crops. Okay, so here we are walking through our farm. We have a few different crops here. We have a Salanova lettuce growing. We have a different lettuce mix growing that goes to our CSA members in the market. This was directly seeded into the ground, so did not start the greenhouse. We have sweet peppers and hot peppers and Japanese frying peppers called shishitos. And we have a lot of different tomatoes. So we have a few different types of cherries. We have indigo cherry drop right here. So the tomatoes, oh, that was foul. These tomatoes are supposed to look this color. They aren't sick. Sometimes people come here and they ask us, what's wrong with the crop? Nothing's wrong. We're just trying to show, as local innovative farmers, another different type of tomato, that there's more than one different variety of crop out in the market. And that's something I want to talk about a little bit more as we are walking through the farm and looking at all these different crops. Something else that's different about industrial farming versus a market gardener or a regenerative farmer is we're trying to show that there's more than one type of crop out there for anything you like to eat. So there's more than one type of tomato, and there's more than one type of kale, and there's more than one type of carrot. And through industrial farming, we have lost a lot of diversity on our plates in our supermarkets that we incorporate into our pallets. And I believe that part of being a regenerative farmer is regenerating the food cultures from the past, the foods that we used to enjoy to eat. Why should we only be eating one type of tomato or one type of lettuce or one type of broccoli? There's up to 10 different types of every single plant we like to eat, probably more out there. And we want to bring back some of those seeds or some of those plants that we don't really see a lot, and introduce them to people so we can start to expand what we're eating and expand what we're growing. And why have we lost a lot of this diversity? Well, we've lost a bit of it because a lot of the crops that we aren't growing anymore as a society as a whole, maybe they aren't very shelf stable. Maybe they look a little bit different. They don't look very beautiful when they're growing. They look a little funky. Like some tomatoes, like heirloom tomatoes, look a little cracked or bumpy when you're growing them, yet they have a really deep and rich taste. Maybe these crops or these plants, maybe a certain type of tomato that we don't see grown a lot, doesn't produce a lot of fruits per plant. In America particularly, we have bred our plants to usually have a higher sugar content to be more tasty to our palate, to produce a lot of plants per plant, or a lot of fruits, or a lot of leaves, or a lot of peppers maybe per plant. And we've grown them to look beautiful, to look maybe shiny, to look deep in color. But sometimes there's trade-offs. Sometimes when things look really beautiful, they don't always taste the best. And that's why if you've ever been to a farm stand, you may think, wow, this tomato is the best tomato I've ever tasted, or wow, this color of the color of this orange is so bright. And that's because when you're growing locally, when you're growing from organic seed, when you're growing in a market gardener's fashion, sometimes, but not always, the veggies and the fruits tend to taste a lot better. All right, so speaking of crop diversity, I'm going to show you our kale patch. This kale patch was planted in the spring. It could last us all the way until November if we want, and it may. We also planted another group of kale for the fall. But here we are. We have 3 different types of kale, and yet there are so many more out there. We have lacinato, or you may know as toscano, or dinosaur kale. We have curly kale right here. And then we have another variety, which you probably see in your spring mixes or salad mixes from the supermarket, but you may have never seen it larger. We have a red Russian kale. So all these crops are crops that you may have not seen in the supermarket. Maybe you've seen Toscano kale, you've probably seen curly, but red Russian, I would bet you've never seen it on a supermarket shelf. Those purple and orangey tomatoes, I bet you've probably never seen them on a supermarket shelf. And some eggplant I'm going to show you. You may have never seen these eggplants on a supermarket shelf before. We're trying to introduce people to vegetables and fruits that are not very commonly seen in their day-to-day lives, in order to show them that agriculture doesn't have to be one way. We can expand our view on how agriculture can help the environment and add beauty and nutrition to our lives in ways we didn't really imagine. So, for example, here is this beautiful little eggplant. Hopefully you can see it. It's a pink tongue eggplant. And it's a lot different than the eggplants we see in the supermarket. This I'll allow to grow a little bit bigger, but once it's 5 to 6 inches, it will be really tender and it'll be at the ideal point to pick and send to our market or to our CSA members. And in contrast to that, I'll show you an eggplant that you're probably a lot more used to seeing. Here's another beautiful eggplant, but it's rounder. It's what we're used to seeing. I would think in the supermarket, or when we see a picture of an eggplant, we're probably seeing this. And it's okay to still enjoy. It's okay to still enjoy the veggies that we have grown up eating or we're comfortable using in our recipes. But as a young grower, as someone who is trying to use agriculture as a way to educate our communities, to help the environment, to remind people of older food ways that we used to practice, or our ancestors used to practice, we like to incorporate at MEVO a mix of things into our field, a mix of plants and a mix of varieties. All right, so one other thing I want to talk about before we leave is another side of regenerative farming, which is compost, which is decreasing our yield, decreasing our outputs. So we're trying to lower our inputs, how much water we're using, how much fertilizer we're using, but we're also trying to lower our output, so how much waste we're producing. And as an environmental organization, that's really important to us. And we're not going to make it back to our compost cages today, but I will show you something that will be going to compost, which is this. So this is a wheelbarrow. It's full of maybe disease or holy leaves that were eaten by pests, which right now are cabbage worms. And this wheelbarrow will be going back to our composting system. And if you don't know about composting, composting is basically recycling for organic matter. And so anything that comes out of our field on our farm, any crop that we're going to solarize, which is something I said I'd show you, so I will, that material will be put into wheelbarrows or in the back of our truck, and we'll bring it to our compost bins. And in our compost bins, this material will sit from anywhere from 3 to 6 months. It will break down with the help of fungi, bacteria, and insects. And eventually it will turn to soil, really nutritious, healthy soil for our plants that we can put right back onto our field. So it's a closed loop system, and it's a pretty sound environmental practice. All right, so now this is the final thing we're going to talk about, and that's what I mentioned before, it's solarization. So here you can see a bed. It's a bed, I believe, of turnips, or maybe it was arugula that we wanted to turn over. And so what we did is we placed a solarization tarp on here. We put sandbags around the end to ensure that it wouldn't fly off with any wind. And then in a few days, on our next farm day, work day, which is Monday, we will take off the tarp, we will rake off the material, and we'll add in our amendments, maybe a little bit more compost, we'll broad fork it, we'll tilt it, and then this bed will be ready to go to plant something else. And right now, MEVO, we are getting ready for our fall planting. So it sounds kind of crazy. I can't believe summer is almost over, but we're already looking to fall. And we have been for a few weeks. So we are planting some of our last plantings for the season, crops that will last us all the way through November. And that includes some baby Swiss chard. If you've never had Swiss chard, it's in the beet family. Swiss chard is bred for the leaves and not the roots, so we don't get roots out of this, we just get really big, beautiful leaves that will be growing. And under this insect netting, I'm not sure if you can see it, we have this netting on here from the groundhogs. We have kale. We have the same types of kale that you saw in the other patch. And we're just growing a newer crop in case the other one doesn't do so well in the future. It's like farm insurance. So thank you everyone for spending some time with me, for learning a bit about regenerative farming of MEVO and why we do what we do. You can reach me through our website, mevo.org, and we have contact information on there if you ever have questions about farming, if you want to come out. It's a crazy time right now, but in the future we'll be back open for volunteer days, and I hope to see you all out here. We run spring, summer, and fall internships too, and a lot of the time we'll be on the farm learning about regenerative farming, learning about how to bring a community together around farming, and I'm wishing all of you a wonderful rest of the summer and a great fall.